I'm a mother. My daughter is autistic, delightfully autistic. She's 18 years old. I'm also a woman with ADHD. So today we're going to talk about neurodiversity, where it comes from, so its origin, and where it's going and what it means. And how as a church community we can welcome neurodivergent people, be accepting of them, appreciate their differences, and maybe make a friend. You know, sometimes we forget that we can do that. Why am I standing here? Why is I'm the one talking about neurodiversity? Because I have ADHD. Obviously, this is a lifelong thing. You don't just get it. So I didn't understand that that's what I had for the longest time. I just thought I was different. And it wasn't until, well, my adulthood that I realized that. I also didn't realize what I was doing when I would self-advocate, which is very popular now, and we talk about that. I just called it demanding respect for myself. And I think that's what people do when they self-advocate. I've also advocated for my daughter since she was 4. She's been keeping me on my toes. So that's been quite a journey for me. And I'm a big fan of therapists. We use those to help get through our troubles, and especially neurodivergent people is hard in a neurotypical world, and you'll get to know these definitions as we go. And I'm between therapists right now though, but that's okay because my mother moved in with me. And there have been so many aha moments of having my mother move in with me. So I've kind of discovered, you know, it's ADHD, neurodivergence is inherited. That's what they have determined. It's not just a spontaneous thing that happens. So it occurs in families. So my husband lives with 3 only children who all are neurodivergent. A quick background on me, I've lived in Maryland my whole life, except for a few years in Alexandria, and for 6 months I thought I was going to be moving to LA, so that's about it. I went to University of Maryland, well, grew up in Southern Maryland, went to University of Maryland in engineering, opened an art gallery, went through a divorce and a bankruptcy, and then took 5 years of a mental health break. So it was a long time, but it was important. I've been coming to Severna Park, UMC, for about 3 years now. Before that, I went to the First Baptist Church of Accokeek. My grandmother's brother was the pastor there, so I was very involved in the church. However, I realized that my uncle was controlling and unfortunately hypocritical. So I stopped going to church at about age 12. And so it wasn't until 3 years ago that I've come back. So it feels good. And before I get started, 2 things. One is, let me see, I took an activist point of view with this information. There's lots of different viewpoints on most everything. So mine is from an activist viewpoint, and I think that gives us a good foundation. The second is that my slides are designed for you to be able to go back and look at them. So there's a lot of information on them that I won't cover, but you can download the slides and you have that as a reference. It just goes a little deeper than what I'm talking about because y'all don't want me to go into stuff real deep. It would be, you'd be here forever. Let's see, this actually is, this is the symbol for neurodiversity, just so you know. It's the infinity symbol. And here's the definition, or a definition of neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the diversity of human minds, the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. Now, this seems obvious, right? but you'll find out as we go on that it's not quite so obvious. And this is reference 5 from 2014. This is Nick Walker, who has been a neurodiversity activist for a very long time. So I used his information in a lot of my definitions, and I'll mention him here and there. Neurodivergent and neurodivergent. Neurodivergent is having the mind that functions in a way which diverges significantly from the dominant societal standards. A person can be neurodivergent, and that's important, you'll find out later. And divergence is absolutely the standard, the state of being neurodivergent. And just another thing you'll find out later that's important is in 2000, neurodivergence and neurodivergent were coined by Cassian Asasumasu. So that's kind of important because who we attribute these things to is important. Neurotypical, style of neurocognitive functioning that falls within the dominant societal norm. A person, again, can be neurotypical, and that's important. And another definition is it is the opposite of neurodivergent, which is an interesting way to put it. And you might think, well, that's kind of a negative connotation. But I think what they're doing is they're trying to get away from normal. What is normal, you know? So we say opposite of neurodivergent. So we have the neurodivergent population, and everything else is neurotypical. So we don't have to pinpoint normal. We say it's kind of the opposite of neurodivergent. This is from Nick Walker. Again, this is an abbreviated version because you'll see the other one is that. And that you can go over later on your own. This is a perspective that approach that boils down to these principles. Neurodiversity is natural and valuable. There's no one normal. And there are societal pressures and prejudice in the neurotypical community. But there's also potential for great things to happen if we embrace neurodivergent. And there's that one that you can ignore for now. Now, what I found is there's a practical, that because the first one I just read, it seems kind of not abstract, but you know, it sounds good, but how are we going to put that in practice? So I came up with this one just by reading and people's referring to it. Diversity of minds and brains should be valued, and individuals with neurological disabilities should be accepted for who they are without attempts to cure or normalize. That's important. It rejects the pathologizing of a neurodivergence that is intrinsic to a person's personality and psyche, but it respects some person's decision to medicate, which I think is also important. Now, the neurodivergence that fall under this paradigm, there's obviously a lot of neurodivergence, but the ones that fall under the paradigm, examples are ADHD, autism, intellectual differences, mental health differences, learning disabilities. Now, neurodiversity or differences that do not fall under this paradigm are things like epilepsy, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, and other acquired neurological conditions. What I didn't say, I feel like I'm out of order. Anyway, the neurodiversity paradigm embraces the social model. So this is the social model. Disability lies not solely within a person's body, mind, within the environment, but there's a mismatch between the disability and a person's body, mind, and their environment. So these barriers not only include physical and sensory barriers, but attitudinal barriers, such as neuronormative ableist attitude that pervade the society. And like I said, neurodiversity paradigm embraces this social model. An example of a social model would be basically if there are stairs and a person that uses a wheelchair cannot get up those stairs. So what do? The social model says we put in a ramp, right? So if we extend this social model to neurodivergence, you think, well, what accommodations can we make? We should offer the same social model to neurodivergent population as we do somebody who needs a wheelchair. Now here's the pathology paradigm, defined by two assumptions. There is only one healthy way for human minds to function, neurotypical. And if your neurological functioning diverges from whatever, then there's that might happen more than once. Then there's something wrong with you. And that again is Walker, but this is 2021. And the pathology paradigm embraces the medical model and calls for a cure for neurodivergence. And this is the model. It assumes conditions to be a disability and pathological with a need to be cured. And they're treated with the goal of eliminating the disability and making the person able-bodied. Now here's some examples of the pathology paradigm. This is the National Autism Association. Children with autism do progress. Early intervention is key. Okay, that's against the neurodiversity paradigm right there. It's treatable, not hopeless, which suggests that it is hopeless. Currently there's no cure, which suggests, of course, that there should be a cure, and the symptoms can be improved by, in some cases, completely overcome, which is exactly what we're saying the opposite of, that we don't need to overcome these neurological differences. Somebody want to come in? Oh, good. Hi, honey. You're welcome. Have a seat. Sit wherever you like. So what we learn is that, right, to suggest that they can completely be overcome is against our neurodiversity paradigm. Another example is applied behavior analysis, and you may have heard about this. This is very popular. This whole approach is designed to change the neurodivergent behavior. Very controversial approach. The terms ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and ASD, which is the medical term, autism spectrum disorder. That's the medical term for autism. Both perpetuate the pathology paradigm. We have in ADHD the deficit. They call it a deficit and they call it a disorder, which we're saying it's not. And in ASD, they're calling it a disorder, which I, from the beginning, have discarded that word from my vocabulary when even talking about autism. So now there's the neurodiversity movement, a social justice movement. This is 2014. This is Nick Walker again. A social justice movement that seeks civil rights, equality, respect, and full societal inclusion for the neurodivergent. Here is one from 2024. You can see the neurodiversity movement has really grown and expanded, but there's still a core to it. I won't go through all of it. I'll just say that it refutes the pathology paradigm. It focuses on the strengths of neurominorities whilst not disregarding their divergent disablement. That's important. Helping to break down disabling barriers, and this, including the neuromajority, in other words, neurotypicals, when talking about neurodiversity. Let me see if I can find, I've already lost track of everything. What we talked about, the very first slide, was diversity. Diversity is the diversity of human minds, the variation of neurocognitive functioning within our species. And this is what they're saying, they're saying neurodiversity is everybody, the neuromajority and the neurominority. And neurodiverse, this is interesting, a group of people is neurodiverse if one member of the group differs substantially from other members in terms of their neurocognitive functioning. So in other words, neurodiverse refers to a group of people. So neurodiverse versus neurodivergent. Many people mistakenly use neurodiverse when they should be using neurodivergent. Most errors refer to that error. And you'll see there's a controversy here. This is why it's important, and I should have said language is very important to the activist community. We kind of take it for granted, but it's very important to them. Now, not to say that if you were to talk to somebody who was neurodivergent, they would call you out on it. They're not going to call you out on it. They probably don't even realize it's the activist community. So if you're talking to an activist, they're going to call you out on it. But somebody, you know, just an autistic person, they're not going to care. Just FYI. But here's the controversy. There's an article, The Problem with Calling Neurominorities Neurodiverse, and it was published in October of last year. So this is a common thought. And he says, using the word neurodiverse to refer to individual people spreads neurodiversity light, which we read about. A paradigm that upends the neurodiversity paradigm, which I think really says a lot. He's saying, don't do this, okay? Now, this is an ongoing project at the University of Washington in Seattle, a big university. It's in the Do It program, which it's a very nice program. There's the website if you want to check it out. It's helping neurodivergent people learn things in their way. But look at the title. It says Neuroscience for Neurodiverse Learners. This directly calls them neurodiverse instead of neurodivergent. And this is an ongoing program now, and I have to wonder to myself, they have to know that there's a controversy with that word. They're in the business. So why did they use neurodiverse? I'm not really sure, unless it was I don't know why, I can't figure it. Just interesting. Okay, the origin of neurodiversity. I'm going to go through a couple different things that have happened over the years, but there is an end game to it. I'm just not listing these for nothing. In 1993, Don't Mourn for Us was published by Jim Sinclair. It argued that parents need to accept and embrace their children's differences, which was a huge change, because up to that point, a diagnosis of autism was a tragedy. It was a death sentence, practically. It was a giving up on your child. And he said it is not possible to separate the person from the autism. In 1998, Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, introduced the term neurodiversity in her honors thesis. Her work and thesis grew out of conversations on a forum called Independent Learning on the Autistic Spectrum. And with the permission from members, so she was, above board about it. And she discussed neurodiversity in the context of a disability justice movement. She's considered, or has been considered, the mother of neurodiversity. But the same year, in the Atlantic magazine, an article was published by Harvey Bloom called The Neurodiversity on the Neurological Underpinnings of Geekdom. And he wanted into being a geek. I didn't read it, but it's funny. 2013 was when the neurodiversity movement really came to life, because there's a special issue in Wired called Neurodiversity Rewires Conventional Thinking About Brains, and it had a wide reach. So it really got out to the general population about the word neurodiversity and what that might mean. And like I was saying, in 2014, Nick Walker came up with these great definitions, which a lot of people use today and refer to. However, there's a recent twist. Singer has posted several derogatory statements on social media regarding the LGBTQ community. So she's a victim, I have to just say, of social media. I mean, I don't want to say she's a victim. She shouldn't have said these things. They were not very nice. but they drew attention to her, which didn't turn out very well for her. She specifically drew attention from Martin Decker, who around 1996 started the online forum Independent Living on the Autistic Spectrum. If you remember, that's the forum that she used for her work. And it was 1998 when she introduced neurodiversity in her thesis. Well, Decker's like, enough is enough. He's been thinking that maybe she shouldn't be saying she's the mother of neurodiversity for years, but finally he's just like, okay, I got this. So Decker searched his archives and he found the earliest discussion of neurological diversity was by a member of the forum named Tony Langdon in a conversation with Phil Schwartz. And that was before Singer even joined the forum. Well, Decker's work, he, I think, published in social media, but somehow it got back to the academics, to the activists. And in 2024, 6 academics published a letter in the journal, the research journal Autism. And they say, we conclude that both the concept of neurological diversity or neurodiversity, they're saying they're one and the same, and the body of theory surrounding it should be understood as having been collectively developed by neurodivergent people, which says a lot. What they did was they gave it back to the neurodivergent people. They said, look, Singer, you didn't come up with this, we did as a group, which I think is awesome. Okay, which one is right? What do you think? Autistic person or person with autism? Now, I'm gonna go into why, which one is right, so. Which one?
Person with autism.
Person with autism, okay. Now, which one is right here? An American woman or a woman who is American? Which one would you think? What do we say, just in conversation?
Commonality is American woman.
Exactly. And a depressed man or a man who has depression. What do we use, like in common language, what would we say?
Depressed.
Or depressed.
Depressed man.
That's more
Or
fitting
man
to
who
me.
has- It is,
Yeah.
the man with depression, who has depression.
Yeah, I would go with a man who has depression. A depressed man could be somebody who just happens to be depressed. So an American woman is the, generally what we might say, and this is called identity first language. The thing that they identify with, being an American, comes first before the woman, which is their person. And in the next example, a depressed man or a man who has depression would be the preferred language, and that's called person first language. And there is a difference. Identity first language is typically preferred for, and these are examples, a lesbian woman, a deaf person, or an autistic man. Typically, identity first is preferred in a community that has developed a culture and a sense of pride in their identity or disability, and they don't view it as an impairment. It is part of who they are. This is why many autistic adults prefer the identity first language. Now, in terms of ADHD, that's a little tricky one, because an ADHDist, or, but what a lot of people are saying is ADHDer, or just, I'm ADHD. I'm an ADHD woman. So they're trying to go identity first, but there are people that don't want to do that because there's not this culture, this pride and community right now in that, with that diagnosis. When person first is typically preferred, a woman with diabetes, a man with anxiety, a child with autism. So the goal of a person first language is to avoid language that dehumanizes or stigmatizes. Best when somebody has a disease or mental health disorder. Parents of children with autism often prefer person first language. Do we have any suggestions on why that might be? Why would a parent prefer person first? My idea is that at that point, they're still at the stigma stage. You know, their child has just been diagnosed. It's a stigma to them. They don't want to suggest that's their identity. And who wants to place an identity on their 5-year-old? You know, you don't wanna say, you're this. They're only 5. They could be anything, right? So I think that's why they're doing it, that's my guess. On the Autism Society of Maryland website, they use a mix of both. So that's actually a suggested way to handle it. So now which one is right? They're both right. They're both right. Autistic person is typically for an adult. Person with autism is typically for children. Not always. Not everybody follows that rule, unwritten rule, but it does. Okay, now let's get into the actual neurodivergent styles. Being autistic. Okay, this is a long list of traits, so I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm just going to talk about, or just say the ones that maybe you might encounter if somebody comes into the church. You know, you might have a conversation with somebody. Difficulty initiating or maintaining conversation, or lack of interest in interacting with you at all. And difficulty with nonverbal communication, eye contact, facial expressions, body language. And signal processing delays. They might not respond to your question right away. You know, you have to give them time, and I have to tell you, this is what I found. Living in Severna Park, things happen like this. People are very successful around here. And we move fast. Well, I don't. I don't move fast. But often people do. And it happens to me where, you know, we're having a conversation and somebody may ask me a question and I don't get to answer the question because somebody else decides they're going to answer it, or the person answers it themselves, and I'm just like, you know, okay. And they might display repetitive movements or behaviors, and these are called stims or stimming. They can be very recognizable, flapping their hands or winking, or they can be covert, like tapping a toe or just shaking their knee. So just be aware of that. Difficulty processing inputs, loud noises, bright lights, certain textures. Well, the lights and the sounds you might come across. So they might actually have to excuse themselves and say, I need to go somewhere. They might stop in the middle of a conversation and say, I need to, you can tell. And they have challenges with self-regulation. So they might get emotional and tell you about it. Difficulty overcoming mistakes and criticism. You don't want to joke around too much with a person who is autistic because they take things very literally. So they're going to take whatever you say to mean what you've just said and possibly make them feel bad, and then they have a hard time getting over it. They're going to hyper-focus on a special interest. You could hear 25 reasons why, I don't know, trains should be blue. You just don't know. Now this, we talked about self-regulation. If you want to go into this anymore, you can. Interoception is very interesting concept. It's kind of this new thing to talk about with self-regulation. Now we're going to talk about the spectrum. For the longest time, and most people think of the autism spectrum as linear. You know, you have high functioning, low functioning. You have levels 1, 2, 3. It's very linear. Well, now, this is a recent development. They're using the circle diagrams, pie charts, with segments. And each of the segment is a different trait. And this you can go into yourself. It talks about why the linear version is not the best thing and can be actually harmful. And I like the term outwardly appearing different. So sometimes I try to use that term, or not outwardly appearing different, because with autism, that's what you get. Some people, you can really tell right away. And what happens is with the linear version is that these people are not given opportunities because they're immediately put in the lower functioning section. Then you have the people who are higher functioning and they're not outwardly different. Like my daughter, when she was in elementary school, she did not appear different. And so their challenges are overlooked. They don't get the assistance that they need. They don't get the interventions that they need. And that's with the linear approach. Now this is the pie chart. This is a map of an autistic person's challenges. And you can see there's stimming here, meltdowns, eye contact, social issues. And as you go to toward the outer side of the pie, the challenge gets greater. And here's another example of that. Same thing, as you move outward, the person's challenges get greater. And this is just an example of how they like to color code them, which is typically the way you see them, color coded. Now this is from August 2024, an article or a piece in apricot.com, I think. I'm not really sure about who these people are. I was just interested in what they put out here, and that it was in 2024. The way they describe it is as you move out on the segment, you're talking, those are the strengths of the autistic person. So as you get to the outer edge, you're talking neurotypical. Inner is autistic, which is completely opposite of what we just talked about. There was mapping their challenges versus mapping their strengths. And I thought that was very interesting because the business doesn't know what to do. They haven't decided what's the right thing. So we're kind of at the cusp of something, I think. Masking. Masking is when a autistic person tries and sometimes succeeds in suppressing their autistic tendencies, their natural response to things. They just kind of hold it all in. Or maybe if something is bothering them, a loud sound or something, they'll just, like my daughter will do that with the clanking of metal on metal. That really bothers her. And sometimes I can just see her, she goes like this. Or if I'm doing it, she'll go like this. I try not to do it, sometimes I forget. And masking often happens with girls, that's what they say. I'm not sure I believe that. There hasn't been a lot of studies done, but it could be all girl or a lot of girls, because girls are more inclined, I think, to act, to try to fit in. We're taught to be good girls. Whereas boys, oh, he's just acting like a boy, So it could be girls. Now, here's a response from the autistic person if they possibly have been masking for too long and it's just gotten to them. It's called BIMS periods. And this was first introduced in 2021. There was an article published. And it stands for autistic burnout, autistic inertia, autistic meltdown, and autistic shutdown. And these periods are good opportunities for neurotypicals to provide support. Oops, there we go. So burnout, a loss of energy due to exceeding limits, possibly by masking. So this is kind of the first step.
Stop it.
Autistic inertia. This is when you feel physically, emotionally, or mentally stuck. It can be mistaken for laziness by neurotypicals, but it's not. Autistic meltdown. Now this is interesting because I think most of us would be able to appreciate what this fellow's doing. He's stepping on his computer, laptop. So we might all deal with things in our own way, and this is a loss of control in an effort to overcome sensory overload and dysregulation. They're moving a step even further into autistic shutdown. This is when you're frozen due to being extremely overwhelmed for an extended time or due to a traumatic experience. And this is the extreme case when an person just completely shuts down. And here is just a slide that goes a little bit more detail into what we just talked about. So the practical results of pathologizing autism can lead to masking or camouflaging, they're called sometimes, can lead to BIMS, stress, depression, anxiety, and suicidality. Here are some statistics. The most important is that of adults who've been diagnosed with autism late, they're 9 times more likely to have suicidal ideation. Of autistic children 8 years old and younger, 36% reported wanting to die. 35% reported wanting to end their own life, and 18% reporting having a suicidal plan. This gives me chills. I don't know. Now, how to support an autistic person? Educate yourself to the needs or interests or challenges of the community, which you're doing now, which is great, or of the particular person. Communicate clearly, like we talked about. They don't rely on body language or literary devices or joking around. And I don't know about this, but check in periodically to make sure that they understand what you're saying. I always think that's condescending. Yeah, you agree? Yeah. So I don't know if I do that, but that's what they're suggesting. And be a good listener. You know, if you don't understand something they've said, respect what they are saying and ask for clarification. Be genuine about your interests. And that's another one of the things you can do is be genuine. Be patient with their conversation dynamics, their signal processing may be slower. And be aware, again, of their sensory challenges. And be understanding and positive. That may be hard in a situation. You may be very overwhelmed with the situation, with dealing with an autistic person, because some are outwardly very different. Autistic joy. They say that people with autism can experience intense joy, and it can be related to an internal or external experience. It could be interests, sensory, social, or emotional triggers. And they also say that this can happen more often and more intense in autistic people. And I just want to share an experience that I had. My daughter and I were at the Arundel Aquatic Center, and there was a group of people waiting for a swim class. And they were just waiting there, most of them very patiently, but there was this one boy that was acting out. And I thought to myself, boy, he's ill-tempered, right? And then the dad turns around, and the people are kind of looking, and he turns around to the people around and he says, he really gets excited about swim class. And I thought, wow, what did I just do, right? What I realize now in my research is that what happened there was I witnessed autistic joy. What a gift, you know? It was a gift. Okay, here's a question for you. What if, as a community, we want to open ourselves up to the neurodivergent population? So if there's, say, a family with a neurodivergent child, or boy or girl, and they're sitting in a pew in the back, let's say, and Reverend Ron or Reverend Nare are doing their sermon, and all of a sudden the boy or girl expresses autistic joy or very loud or starts stimming, what are you going to do? How are you going to feel about that? I think that's something for us all to think about. I know for me it would be uncomfortable, but I have an idea of what I might do. Does anybody have any ideas on what they might do or might feel or think? It's a tough question. I say you go, amen. Get right in there. They're experiencing autistic joy. Join in the party. something that the Reverend has said has just taken hold of them, and they feel it. And that we should just say, amen, God bless for that. Okay, ADHD. Okay, be patient with me here. A disruption in the brain's neurotransmitter system, particularly dopamine and norepinephrine, leading to abnormal activity in the prefrontal cortex and other areas of the brain. That's all you're going to get from me in terms of medical reasons for ADHD. I just pulled that down and said here. Okay, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There can be 3 types. The attention deficit type, hyperactivity or impulsive type, and then the combined type. I'm the combined type. So see, all of these things are me. And again, I'll just go through the ones you might experience here if somebody were coming to church, right? They have a lack of focus. They get distracted really easily. They're very forgetful. So, like with me, you might say something and then a couple sentences later they might have forgotten what you just said, right? Now the hyperactivity or impulsive type. This is something that might come out more in the conversation. They're impulsive, they're impatient, tendency to fidget, they interrupt, a lot of energy, difficulty paying attention, and they might blurt out inappropriate things. Let's see, and this is the ADHD iceberg. I thought was interesting. You have hyperactivity, inattention, and impulsivity, which we can see. They're very obvious in many cases. But you have all of these other things under the water that you can't see. And my question is, for all of these traits, are they really traits? Or are they a response to living in a neurotypical world? So I think some of these traits can be eliminated. They're not part of the ADHD mind. They're acquired. Okay, here's interesting. Now maybe, I don't know if you guys get this. My husband did not get this. The guy says, funny story, that day and the girl's just like, just give me the cup. I'm really impatient and hate having to wait for anything. So I have to explain this because my husband didn't get it at all. He's like, I don't get it. The girl has asked the guy to pass her a cup. He picks up the cup. He's got a story to tell about that cup. She didn't want any part of it. She's just like, pass me the cup, okay? Anyway, that's me. This next one. I get easily excited and people often misinterpret that as being immature and not knowledgeable. This is me all over. I get very excited about things. I got very excited. I did beading for a while, and I was telling this woman at a party about the beads, and I was getting really excited. They're colorful, they're this or that. And I said, I really like these things. And she's like, she took on presents, condescending presents, like, yeah, I can really tell. So how did that make me feel, you know? So maybe we have to accept that type of behavior. And all of these deficits or challenges, I shouldn't have said deficits, all of these challenges of the ADHD person, don't leave them out of the conversation. There's a lot of benefits to being ADHD. I'll just touch on a couple of them. They're authentic because an ADHD person has a very hard time feigning interest over something they're not interested in. They just can't do it, you know? If they're interested in it, they're all in. If they're not interested in it, forget about it. They can think outside of the box because they live outside of the box, right? They're compassionate because they've benefited from the compassion of others. They're great at brainstorming. So you really want them in the room when you're brainstorming because they've got ideas just coming and coming. My favorite is adaptive, problem solver, because, and I do this too, you go into a situation knowing you're going to make a mistake You're gonna be late. You're gonna forget. Something's gonna happen. So you also go into a situation going, what's my backup plan? How am I gonna do a workaround? Am I gonna write this down so that I can read it later? So they're very adaptive. Spontaneous, obviously, they're impulsive. They're just ready to go. And something I thought, well, this clarity in crisis, this I do. And for some reason, ADHD people are good at this. I've read this a couple of times. When there's a crisis or an emergency, they hyper-focus. They're there. They're all in. Nothing is important but this. So when they're in a crisis, they can really handle it. You want them there. And as a matter of fact, there's a high tendency for them to be in first responder situations, ERs, police officers, fire and rescue, they're in. And I won't go into it anymore because we need to move on. Some harmful rhetoric. If you cared enough, you would remember. Okay. See, I have notes on this. Let me just see, because this was a long one. I'm almost done, so don't worry. But I really have to share this. Okay, I've read that when you meet somebody and you want to remember their name, wait a minute, where was I? Well, I've read part of the problem of forgetting, is that a memory has to be kind of engraved in your brain before you can remember it, right? And an ADHDer doesn't have the focus to hold on to that event, to get it in there, and then to revisit it later. So I understand that if you're meeting somebody, one of the things that you can do is repeat their name. Well, actually start over. If somebody's introducing themselves to me, my brain is probably somewhere else, right? And I have to transition to that situation. Well, I've already lost their name because they've said it and I'm not even present. If I introduce myself to somebody, I'm already somewhere else. I asked that question, I'm somewhere else, and then, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm somewhere else, and then I missed their name. They're not there. So they say that you can repeat their name to yourself, and that will help you remember. Well, okay, so what you're telling me is that I need to repeat this person's name over and over and over while I'm having a conversation, right? No, that's trouble right there. So another thing that you can do is repeat their name after the conversation. You can ask them, oh, can you please tell me your name again? Well, the problem with that is throughout the conversation, I've been either repeating their name or I've been worried that I've forgotten their name. So I'm tense. They say their name a second time, bing, it's gone again. I'm already tense. So by the end of the conversation, 3 things have happened. 1, I don't know what they've said. I've just lost the conversation. 2, I haven't participated in the conversation. I've offered nothing. They're thinking this person has nothing going on in their head. 3, I can't remember their name. So this whole thing is just a problem waiting to happen. Some other rhetoric is more time for people with ADHD is unfair. And ADHD people lack discipline or are lazy. And I'll just briefly go over this. This blog that I read, this person, she took the Newton's first law of inertia and changed it to ADHDers. ADHD people, how does it go? I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm losing my train of thought. Oh, forget it. Anyway, ADHD people stay in motion until there's an equal and opposite thing to stop them. And so what happens if you're not doing anything all you wanna do is nothing, and you can't get going, you can't get motivated. So it takes an epic emergency first for you to get going, which is bad, because then you have to be, then they're present, they're there, cause they are into emergencies, but they've turned it into an emergency. And if you're already going, if you're hyper-focused on something, again, it takes an epic event to stop you. Someone can't say 15 minutes until dinner, doesn't matter. You're gonna be late for work, doesn't matter. The epic event is when you look at the clock and it says, I'm supposed to be there right now. That's the epic event, and then you're like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. ADHD people are not smart. Well, here's a list of people that are ADHD. Either have had or probably had. Here's the last thing I'll talk about. There is this TEDx talk by this person named Salif Mehamain, and he talked about, he coined this phrase, which I thought was really cool. It's called hunter-gatherer badass. That's what he called ADHDers, because there was this thesis that ADHD traits were beneficial to our nomadic ancestors. So what happened was that they did a study. Anthropologists studied primarily nomadic populations in North Kenya called the Ariel. A subgroup of this nomadic population settled in local towns. So they had this great environment. They had a group nomadic, a group settled, and they both had the same DNA. So what they did is they determined that based on BMI, that's how they determined a person's success. So the higher the body mass index, the more successful a person is, because that's the way it used to be. So what they found is that the ADHD trait, if you had fewer ADHD traits in the settled community, you were more successful. So the ADHD traits were actually detrimental. Now in the nomadic group, you had more ADHD traits, you were more successful. So the ADHD traits were beneficial to the group who were nomadic. And what the author supposed was that the fluid attention of ADHD traits led the nomadic group to being able to identify threats, illness problems, or source water or food. And evolutionary mismatch, it's in the definitions at the end. You can look that up. How we can support ADHD: focus on a person's strengths, be patient and flexible with their issues, adapt your expectations. Maybe like, okay, I'll tell Joe that the thing starts at 8:45 when the thing really starts at 9. And step out of your box, comfort zone, or your own paradigm before drawing conclusions, before judging. Okay, that's it. I just have, now this is for people who want to pull the slides off. There's definitions, there's the references I made. Okay, does anybody have any questions or anything you want to say? It's a lot of information. I hope it was helpful. I enjoyed putting it